Hey guys, how's it going? TJ here with Dead History, and welcome back to part 2 of our next Vice Presidential Series installment as we're taking a look at the 21st Vice President of the United States, Thomas A. Hendricks. I hope you enjoyed part 1 yesterday, of course taking a look at the early life and childhood and education and political career and political rise of Thomas A. Hendricks. And now we're going to do part 2 today, where we're going to take a look at the election that got him elected as vice president, his vice presidency, his legacy, his death, and then, of course, his gravesite. That's what we do here, of course, at Dead History, taking a look at the grave sites and the final resting places of all these historical figures. So, I am flying solo, of course, for the audio for part 2 here. So let's just jump right in to part 2, 21st Vice President in our next Vice Presidential Series installment, Thomas A. Hendricks. Cleveland Hendricks. Thomas Hendricks attended the Democratic National Convention in 1884, not as a candidate, but rather as a delegate who would nominate former Indiana Senator Joseph E. McDonald. His appearance at the convention drew much enthusiastic applause since he represented the old ticket of 1876 that had been robbed of victory. As the convention moved toward nominating the reform governor of New York, Grover Cleveland, Cleveland's opponents, especially New York City's Tammany Hall, concluded that Hendricks was the only man around whom the opposition could be united. They planned a strategy to stampede the convention to Hendricks the next day. Just as Indiana swung its vote to him, Thomas Hendricks entered the convention hall through a door facing the delegates. The band struck up a tune as Tammany Hall boss John Kelly and his henchmen leaped from their seats and began shouting for Hendricks. As the delegates paraded, Hendricks sat calmly. To those near him, Indiana Senator Daniel Voorhees asserted he simply appeared to enjoy, in a quiet, silent way, the popular approval of his long and faithful services. These tactics might have worked, except that Cleveland's managers got wind of the conspiracy and sent messages to all the delegates warning them not to get caught up in any spurious demonstrations. Cleveland's supporters argued that New York was essential for a Democratic victory and that Cleveland, a hard-money reform governor, could attract liberal Republican voters, a group known as the Mugwumps. These arguments prevailed, and the Thomas Hendricks boom fizzled when Illinois increased its vote for Cleveland, followed by enough other states to give Cleveland the nomination at the end of the second ballot. Thomas Hendricks was rewarded with the vice presidential nomination, once again to balance a hard-money presidential candidate and to offer the promise of carrying the swing state of Indiana. The prospect of victory invigorated Hendricks, and he campaigned valiantly, proving a tower of strength for the ticket in what has often been described as the dirtiest campaign in American political history. He attacked the incumbent Republican administration, helped stop a party bolt by Tammany Hall, drew large crowds to his speeches, and dramatically survived a late-night train wreck while campaigning in Illinois. Hendricks won praise as an urbane leader. He stood 5 feet 9 inches tall and was described as well-proportioned and stoutly built, though not corpulent. His once light hair had turned silver, and he wore the least of side whiskers, which are light gray, and his complexion is fair. As a speaker, he was clear and forceful, while in conversation, he was easy, courteous, cautious, and deferential. Vice President of the Spoilsmen. In 1884, Democrats won their first presidential election since 1856, and ThomasAHendricks returned as presiding officer to the Senate, where he had once served in a pitifully small minority. From the start, however, Hendricks found himself at odds with President Cleveland, a scrupulously honest man with good intentions but limited vision. Unlike Hendricks, who had long called for more government intervention in the economy to promote agrarian reform, Cleveland advocated laissez-faire economics and was a social Darwinist who thought the slightest hint of government paternalism would undermine the national character. Mugwump reformers waited to see if Cleveland would expand the civil service system recently established by the Pendleton Act, but Democrats, long out of power, demanded patronage. Vice President ThomasAHendricks and many Democratic senators, furious when Cleveland ignored the patronage requests of their state party organizations, considered the president's conduct treacherous. Cleveland dismissed these complaints as the howls of old Jacksonian spoilsmen and wild-eyed currency reformers, among whom he counted his vice president. But by midsummer 1885, Grover Cleveland buckled at the threat of revolt within his party. He replaced his civil service reform-minded assistant postmaster general with former Illinois Congressman Adlai Stevenson, who understood practical politics. Given free rein, Stevenson replaced Republican postmasters with deserving Democrats at a fast clip until more than 40,000 federal jobs changed hands. The Indiana Democratic Organization was particularly outspoken about its dissatisfaction with Cleveland's skimpy patronage, and Vice President Hendricks became known as Vice President of the Spoilsmen. The label Spoilsman distressed Hendricks. As one senator who knew him explained, Hendricks felt the charge came from those who had been wont to linger in the shade and slumber while he and the boys, as he loved sometimes to call the party workers, had borne the heat and dust and burden of the battle. In September, ThomasAHendricks left Washington to attend the 35th anniversary reunion of the surviving members of the Constitutional Convention of Indiana and to rest in anticipation of the coming session of Congress in December. While at home in Indianapolis, ThomasAHendricks died in his sleep on November 25th of 1885. So yes, his very untimely death, which we're going to get into more here in a minute, but I wanted to touch on the presidential election of 1884. Of course, that was Grover Cleveland with his running mate Thomas A. Hendricks going against the Republican James G. Blaine and Blaine's running mate John A. Logan. The electoral vote count was 219 to 182 in favor of Cleveland and Hendricks, and they carried 20 states compared to Blaine's 18. The popular vote count was really close. Cleveland and Hendricks got 48.85%, and Blaine and Logan got 48.28%. So it was extremely close. This was a very close election. Not a landslide by any stretch for Cleveland and Hendricks, but this was the election that got Grover Cleveland nominated as president, and of course, I shouldn't say nominated, elected as president, and ThomasAHendricks as vice president. So this is the election of 1884. You're probably seeing some maps, as I usually show, and maybe some campaign posters and that sort of thing. But there you go. That was the election that got ThomasAHendricks elected as Vice President of the United States in 1884. And now, to touch on more of ThomasAHendricks' death, let me read to you Death of the Vice President. ThomasAHendricks' death eliminated the leader of the possible rival camp to Cleveland's presidency, but also, for the second time in a decade, deprived the nation of a vice president for more than 3 years, raising concerns about the problem of presidential succession. If Cleveland should die, who would become president? The Presidential Succession Act of 1792 provided that the Senate's president pro tempore and the Speaker of the House, in that order, should succeed. There was concern that one of these offices might soon be filled with members of the opposition rather than members of Cleveland's party, since both posts were vacant at the time of Hendricks' sudden death. And while Democrats controlled the House, Republicans controlled the Senate. On the recommendation of Massachusetts Republican Senator George F. Hoyer, Congress in 1886 adopted a law that eliminated congressional officers from the line of succession in favor of cabinet officers in order of their rank. This system prevailed until 1947, when the death of a president had again left the vice presidency open for almost an entire term, stimulating another reevaluation and a different solution to the problem. When President Grover Cleveland ran for re-election in 1888, Democrats had to choose a replacement for ThomasAHendricks. The honor went to former Ohio Senator Allen G. Thurman. This time, Cleveland faced a Hoosier Republican, Senator Benjamin Harrison. Without ThomasAHendricks on the ticket, the Democrats failed to carry Indiana. Although Cleveland won a plurality of the popular vote, he lost the Electoral College and with it, the presidency. ThomasAHendricks' death, as the veteran journalist Ben Perley-Poore judged, removed an official around whom the disaffected Democrats could have crystallized into a formidable opposition. For Hendricks had not been disposed to accept being what Hannibal Hamlin had described as the fifth wheel on a coach. So there you have it, guys. The very untimely death of Thomas A. Hendricks, our 21st Vice President of the United States. Ironically enough, Hendricks he died on November 25th of 1885. He only took office as vice president on March 4th of 1885. So you're talking literally, what is that? April, May, June, July, August, September, October, 8 months? You're talking a little over 8 months as vice president. That's it. That's literally it. It was close. It was closing in on 9 months, but it's just under the 9-month mark. That's how long he was vice president for. That's it. So it was only about 8 months or so that Hendricks even served as vice president. So a very short vice presidential term for Hendricks before his very untimely death. A very unexpected untimely death. So we're going to read more about his legacy and some things that he did, and then some more about his death. Let's start with some of his legacy and some more things that he did. Let's get into that here. So, guys, yeah, Thomas A. Hendricks. Let's read a little bit more. Thomas A. Hendricks was one of 7 U.S. vice presidents who died in office. He served for less than a year before his death, and his tenure in the office was a small portion of an accomplished life as one of Indiana's most prolific political figures. Hendricks opposed Reconstruction after the Civil War, arguing that the southern states had never been out of the Union and were therefore entitled to congressional representation. He also maintained Congress had no authority to reconstruct state governments. Hendricks voted against the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution, the amendments which granted voting rights to males of all races and abolished slavery. He said that it was not the right time, so soon after the Civil War, to make fundamental changes to the Constitution. Hendricks opposed President Andrew Johnson's removal from office following his impeachment. In 1868, Indiana General Assembly was retaken by the Republicans. Just talking about his governorship. Hendricks ran for vice president of the United States on the Democratic Party's ticket in 1876 and 1884. He was on the losing ticket in the controversial election of 1876. Hendricks did not attend the Democratic Convention in St. Louis, but he was nominated unanimously. With 20 electoral votes in dispute, a 15-member electoral commission, which included 5 persons, we know all that. That was during the 1876, of course, election. Hendricks did attend the Democratic Party's National Convention in Chicago in 1884 as chairman of the Indiana delegation and was once again nominated for Vice President of the United States by unanimous vote on a ticket with Grover Cleveland. The Democratic Party strategy needed each man on the ticket to win his home state, and the Democrats narrowly won New York, but Hendricks carried Indiana. Hendricks would not enjoy the position of vice president for long. He had been in poor health for several years, and he served as vice president only for the last 8 months of his life, from his inauguration on March 4th till his death on November 25th of 1885. Hendricks died unexpectedly during a trip home to Indianapolis on November 25th of 1885. He complained of feeling ill the morning before his death and went to bed early. He died in his sleep that night. His funeral was large, with a ceremony held in St. Paul's Cathedral in Indianapolis and attended by President Grover Cleveland. Hendricks is interred in Indianapolis's Crown Hill Cemetery, which we're going to get into more here in a minute. Thomas A. Hendricks, the Constitution as it is, the Union as it was. Thomas A. Hendricks, an attorney from Shelbyville and later Indianapolis, Indiana, became the most prominent Democrat in Indiana during the Civil War era. As such, he articulated the conservative Democratic position most forcefully and memorably. This stance can be summed up in the words, "The Constitution as it is, the Union as it was." Hendricks was also known for his outspoken white supremacist but anti-slavery views. His frequently quoted remark uttered on the floor of the U.S. Senate reveals this attitude. This is the white man's government, made by the white man, for the white man. In a storied career that included single terms as senator, governor, and an election in 1884 to the vice presidency of the United States, Thomas Hendricks spent nearly 4 decades in public life. First elected to the Indiana House of Representatives in the late 1840s, and then to Congress in 1851, he was appointed by President Franklin Pierce and later reappointed by President James Buchanan to lead the extremely busy General Land Office during a period of numerous and generous land grants. Increasingly out of step with Buchanan's pro-slavery and anti-homestead bill policies, Hendricks resigned his Washington position in 1859. He returned to Indiana and almost immediately found himself at the head of the Democratic Party ticket as it attempted to retain control of the state's reins of power. However, although 1860 was a Republican year, Hendricks fared better against his gubernatorial opponent, Henry S. Lane, than did the rest of the Democratic ticket. Then, according to a prearranged agreement, Governor Lane was chosen by the Republican-controlled General Assembly to become Indiana's new United States Senator. The energetic and ambitious Lieutenant Governor Oliver P. Morton then became governor and served throughout the Civil War. It was a different story in the off-year election of 1862, when the unpopularity of the war and many of President Abraham Lincoln's policies, especially his emancipation plan, resulted in a Democratic sweep of state offices, including control of the Indiana General Assembly. When this body elected another new senator, the popular Hendricks was chosen. In office from 1863 to 1869, Senator Hendricks was involved with the final years of the Civil War and the first years of Reconstruction. Initially, he stoutly supported the Union's war effort, but not the plans for the emancipation of African American slaves. After the war, he spoke out against and voted against the three so-called Civil War amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th to the federal Constitution. In his view, the impassioned feelings of the immediate post-war era and the absence of representatives in Congress from 11 states made the times unpropitious for making basic constitutional changes. Obviously, Hendricks' views resonated with his fellow Hoosier Democrats, and while still a senator, he was nominated to run again for governor in 1868. Hendricks was narrowly defeated by the incumbent governor, Conrad Baker, who had succeeded Morton when he went to the U.S. Senate in 1867. Hendricks retained his personal popularity and ran a third time successfully for the governor's seat in 1872, serving from 1873 to 1877. Still not done with electoral politics, the charismatic governor was Samuel J. Tilden's running mate in the famous disputed election of 1876, in which the Democratic team received more votes than did their opponents, but a partisan electoral commission awarded the victory to Republicans Rutherford B. Hayes and William A. Wheeler. Hendricks' final campaign came in 1884, when he reluctantly, for health reasons, agreed to join Grover Cleveland at the head of the Democratic Party ticket. Successful this time, Hendricks' service as vice president was destined to be short. Inaugurated in March of 1885, the Hoosier politician died at his home in Indianapolis in November of 1885. Regarding Hendricks' Civil War years in Indiana, there is no evidence that he was a member of any Dark Lantern Society, the Knights of the Golden Circle, the Sons of Liberty, or the Order of American Knights, nor was he a Copperhead, if one defines that term as a Northerner who supported the South during the war. If, however, one defines the term more broadly to include those who opposed the Lincoln administration and, following Lincoln's death, the radical Republican agenda, then of course Hendricks certainly belongs in that category. He was an outspoken critic of what he considered the excesses of Lincoln's wartime policies, including emancipation, suspension of the writ of habeas corpus, high tariffs, the issuance of greenbacks, and other banking policies that he believed aided the New England states at the expense of Western states, and many more extra military actions by both the state and national administrations. In particular, Hendricks lambasted the Lincoln administration in a major speech in Indianapolis on January 8th of 1862 during the state Democratic Party convention, which in its platform condemned the Republicans for rejecting compromises that might have averted war and for its violations of freedom of the press and the domestic institutions of sovereign states. But Hendricks consistently supported the war to save the Union, urged compliance with the draft, and deplored armed resistance to its enforcement. In May 1863, at the time of another party gathering in Indianapolis, Thomas Hendricks was threatened by an unauthorized band of roaming soldiers when he attempted to speak. The melee that followed led up to the events known as the Battle of Pogue's Run. Hendricks was also at the center of a volatile situation when he joined Governor Morton on the steps of the State House in eulogizing the assassinated president. Morton's stern demeanor quieted the protesters following cries of "hang him" aimed at Hendricks, and the Democrat was able to continue his remarks. Ironically, this episode occurred near the site on the current State House grounds where a tall monument with a larger-than-life-size statue of Hendricks was erected in 1890 and still stands to this day. Interesting stuff about good old Thomas A. Hendricks. Definitely was a man that, definitely some controversy because he seemed to be totally against emancipation and against the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. He voted against all those amendments to the U.S. Constitution, and he voted against a lot of Reconstruction acts and bills. So definitely some interesting controversial stuff regarding him. Vice presidential nominee, Hendricks ran for vice president in 1876 and 1884, winning in 1884. Democrats also nominated Hendricks for the vice presidency in 1880, but he declined for health reasons. In 1880, while on a visit to Hot Springs, Arkansas, Hendricks suffered a bout of paralysis but returned to public life. No one outside of his family and doctors knew his health was failing. 2 years later, he was no longer able to stand. In the disputed presidential election of 1876, we know that Hendricks was on the ticket as vice president with Samuel Tilden. Hendricks did not attend the Democratic Convention in St. Louis, but the party was pursuing the strategy of carrying the Solid South along with New York and Indiana. They received the majority vote. We know that. The Electoral Commission, and that went south for them. As the chairman of the Indiana delegation, Hendricks did attend the Democratic Party National Convention in 1884 in Chicago, where he was once again nominated as its vice presidential candidate by a unanimous vote. Grover Cleveland was the party's presidential nominee. They won the 1884 election. So there you go. Hendricks, who had been in poor health for several years, served as Grover Cleveland's vice president during the last 8 months of his life. The vice presidency remained vacant after Hendricks' death until Levi P. Morton assumed office in 1889. On September 8th of 1885 in Indianapolis, Hendricks made a controversial speech in support of Irish independence. Soon afterwards, Boston machine politician Martin Lomasney named the Hendricks Club after him. Hendricks did die unexpectedly on November 25th of 1885 during a trip home to Indianapolis. He complained of feeling ill in the morning of November 24th and went to bed early and died in his sleep the following day at 66 years old. Hendricks' funeral service at St. Paul's Episcopal Cathedral in Indianapolis was a large one. Hundreds of dignitaries were in attendance, including President Grover Cleveland, and thousands of people gathered along the city street to see the 1.2-mile-long funeral procession as it traveled from downtown Indianapolis to Crown Hill Cemetery, where his remains were interred. Hendricks, a popular member of the Democratic Party, remained on good terms with both Democrats and Republicans. He was a fiscal conservative and a powerful orator who was known for his honesty and firm convictions. Hendricks was one of 4 vice presidential candidates from Indiana who were elected during the period of 1868 to 1920, when Indiana's electoral votes were critical to winning a national election. 5 other men from Indiana, George Washington Julian, Joseph Lane, Judge Samuel Williams, John W. Kern, and William Hayden English lost their bids for the vice presidency during this time period. Hendricks remains the only vice president who did not serve as president whose portrait appears on U.S. paper currency. An engraved portrait of Hendricks appears on a $10 tombstone silver certificate. The currency note's nickname is derived from the tombstone-shaped border outlining Hendricks' portrait. The Bates-Hendricks house where the family lived from 1865 to 1872 is located in Indianapolis at 1526 South New Jersey Street. The home was added to the National Register of Historic Places on April 11th of 1977. Thomas A. Hendricks Library, Hendricks Hall at Hanover College, which overlooks the Ohio River near Madison, Indiana, was built in 1903. Hendricks' widow Eliza provided funding for the project as a tribute to her late husband, an alumnus of the college. The library was added to the National Register on February 26th of 1982. Portraits of Thomas and Eliza Hendricks hang in the library. The Thomas A. Hendricks Monument was installed on the southeast corner of the State Capitol building's grounds in 1890 at 11 feet. It is the tallest bronze statue on the State House grounds. And the community of Hendricks in Minnesota and the adjacent lake were named in Thomas Hendricks' honor. So there you go, guys. And of course, he is buried at the Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis, Indiana, probably one of the largest cemeteries I have ever visited. Crown Hill Cemetery in Indianapolis, Indiana is gigantic. I mean, just to tell you, there's three or four. I think three. I think it's 3 vice presidents alone buried in this cemetery, and a president, Benjamin Harrison, buried in this cemetery. So this cemetery holds a lot of very, very prominent people are interred here and buried here. The Hendricks, tomb is a big, tall, obelisk. It's pretty cool. Nothing too crazy. Pretty cool though. I enjoyed it. You see my pictures here, of course. And yeah, that's really it, guys. I'm going to show you in bonus footage. I am going to show you the actual more of my photos. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second. More of my photos from the gravesite of Thomas A. Hendricks. But that's about the only bonus footage I have for you guys. All the other stuff you've seen, the stock photos of the statue at the state grounds and the house that he lived in Indianapolis and all that stuff, that's all stock photos I found online. It's not photos I took myself. So there you go, guys. A look at the 21st Vice President of the United States, Thomas A. Hendricks. I hope you guys enjoyed this installment. And, of course, stay tuned, guys, because here we go. Next week, we keep rolling on here. Next week, we will be taking a look at the 22nd Vice President of the United States, who is Levi P. Morton. So stay tuned for that. Thanks, guys. Thanks for all you do. Thanks for all the support. Keep all those comments and questions coming. We really appreciate it. And like I said, we will see you next week for our next Vice Presidential Series installment. Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys. See you next week.